Good afternoon. When I was inaugurated as your governor, I made a simple and straightforward promise that my administration would always be an education-first administration. Education is how we break cycles of poverty. It's how we make sure everyone counts. It's how we provide for better lives for all Kentuckians. It's how we build up a highly skilled workforce so we can quit chasing the jobs of the past and attract the investment and the jobs that are creating the well-paying jobs of the future. Education is how we begin to address the deep historic inequities that have deprived too many Kentuckians of their true opportunity. See, education is the key, the common denominator to building the better Kentucky we want for all of our people. I am a proud product of public education, a proud graduate of Kentucky's public schools. My commitment to public education runs deep. I fought for and helped protect educators' retirements as Attorney General. And as one of my first official actions as governor, I took action to ensure the Kentucky Board of Education was filled with highly qualified Kentuckians who support public education. As part of my Better Kentucky budget, I proposed a $1,000 raise for teachers and classified staffers who've gone above and beyond in their duties, especially in this last year. I sought to increase the SEEK formula and funding for textbooks and technology. I provided funding for preschool programs in disadvantaged areas and restored a teacher loan forgiveness program. And to repair crumbling schools, some of which date back to before the 1930s, I proposed a one-time $100 million investment to replace what are the actual basic building blocks of public education. This plan would not only improve the educational experience for students and teachers, it also create thousands of jobs. And to further show my administration's commitment, in my budget, we proposed the Better Kentucky Promise, a program that aims to provide the necessary last dollars that should allow nearly 6,300 Kentuckians to complete associate's degrees or secure certificates. That budget is what support for our children and support for public education looks like. But that's not the budget nor the laws we currently have before us. In fact, state dollars are being diverted away from public schools and educators. We hope this changes before the end of the session, and we're going to work in good faith with leadership of the majority and the minority in hopes that we can make that happen. Today, I'll be signing some of the bills recently passed by the General Assembly that serve to strengthen education in Kentucky. But other measures represent a direct attack on public education that would significantly weaken our public education system here in Kentucky. For those bills, I will use my executive authority as governor to veto the measures. I usually like to talk about the good news first. Y'all are used to that by now. In this case, we must start on a less positive note. Start with my veto of House Bill 258. Today, I'm vetoing House Bill 258 because it would cut retirement benefits for new teachers. This would harm the Commonwealth's ability to attract the best and the brightest to teach our future. Worse, the measure comes at the same time the General Assembly has cut more than $70 million that my budget provided to help support health insurance benefits for educators' families, and they also refuse to include the raises I proposed for school employees. I've continued to support raises and more benefits for our educators because of people like Laura Hartke, who teaches during the day, has to drive an Uber at night just to make ends meet. The lack of support for our educators is leading to fewer and fewer college students choosing teaching. That is not okay. And Laura having to drive that car at night just to support herself is not okay. At a time when we should be investing in the teaching profession to attract the very best, teacher salaries remain stagnant while their importance to their communities only increase. If the ongoing COVID-19 public health emergency has taught us anything, it's a vital role our educators play in the lives of our children and in our economy. Teachers deserve better, and the Commonwealth owes them an obligation to lift them up and not tear them down. And I want to end on this by talking about compensation. There's a lot of talk out there about minimum wage. when I'm asked about that, I say, well, the wage is important, but what are the benefits? Because your compensation, what you make, what you truly make, is about salary plus benefits. For new teachers, the most important, most lucrative benefit is being slashed. Yet there is no increase in salary. There is no increase in other benefits. There's not even an attempt to provide them Social Security, which is why they have that pension in the first place. I believe in the future of the teaching profession, and I want the very best that are out there to do it. That's the reason for my veto. Next, House Bill 563. I'm also vetoing House Bill 563. I'm doing so because if it becomes law, this measure would greatly harm public education in Kentucky by taking money away from public schools and sending it to unaccountable private organizations with little oversight. To make matters worse, the bill would drain as much as $25 million from public education. Folks, that's more than they requested in textbooks and technology for your kids for this year. The measure would establish private educational institutions that would decide how to spend public money, your dollars, and could use up to 10% of those public school funds for themselves, their own employees' salaries, benefits, and expenses. House Bill 563 would also divert money from our rural public schools that need it so badly, as it only allows these public funds to go to private schools in counties with more than 90,000 residents. At a time we should be investing in public education in our rural communities, House Bill 563 does the exact opposite. The measure also favors the wealthy, giving tax benefits even larger than charitable donation deductions, and people could even profit by transferring securities to the private educational institutions to avoid capital gains. Finally, House Bill 563 is unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional on a number of grounds. By diverting money from public education to private entities, the General Assembly has violated our very Constitution. In addition, by sending state money collected from taxpayers across the state to private schools only in certain communities, the General Assembly has abandoned its obligation under the Constitution, quote, to provide for an efficient system of common schools throughout the state, unquote. House Bill 563 would lead to the same kinds of funding disparities that the Kentucky Supreme Court held was unconstitutional in the Rose case in 1989. See, Rose held that Kentucky's Constitution requires the General Assembly to provide every child equal access to an adequate education. In particular, the General Assembly had violated the Constitution by allowing funding disparities across the Commonwealth and by failing to monitor the quality of education provided to every Kentuckian. In response to Rose, the General Assembly passed CARA and reformed the entire education system to address these problems. Both of these measures run contrary to CARA. They do not serve the interests of the people of Kentucky, and they will not receive my signature to become law. Now I get there is another part, that we have independent school districts that have some challenges and some disagreements with some of our other public school districts. And those are things that we should be willing to talk about. And as people committed to public education, we ought to be able to work through them in a way that does not threaten the future of those independent districts. And I want those superintendents and everybody going to school in those districts to know that I'm willing, ready, and able to work with everybody to find a solution. But that solution is not taking away more than $25 million from public education in what will be the most significant attack on it, and what will signal the end of public education as we know it. Now, I'm going to hand it over to Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman, who is the first public school teacher to ever be elected to Lieutenant Governor, and then Education Commissioner Jason Glass and others for a deeper perspective on these measures.
Thank you, Governor. First, let me begin by thanking you, Governor Beshear, for vetoing House Bill 563 today. I know you don't take your constitutional responsibilities lightly, and I want to thank you for listening to the voices of the education community, of our concerned parents, and most importantly, of our students. As the highest elected teacher in Kentucky, it is my professional responsibility to support Kentucky's system of common schools. As the mom of a 1-year-old, it's my personal duty. Evelyn just learned how to walk. By the time she walks into her kindergarten class for the first time, the damage of House Bill 563 would already be done. Hundreds of millions of public tax dollars that could have gone to strengthening our classrooms and supporting the people in them would have been diverted to private shadow organizations that are unaccountable to Kentuckians. Ultimately, this is why I share the governor's belief that House Bill 563 is unconstitutional and why I know it's unethical. I'm not alone. There are hundreds of thousands of families, taxpayers, and education professionals across the Commonwealth who agree. These shareholders represent every facet of the education community, all 120 counties, both political parties, and their voices deserve to be heard today. Before I introduce our guests, I want to introduce Commissioner Glass, the Kentucky Department from the Kentucky Department of Education, who has a few words on the detrimental impact of House Bill 563 on Kentucky's education system. Dr. Glass.
Thank you, Governor and Lieutenant Governor. I oppose House Bill 563 and appreciate Governor Beshear vetoing this deeply flawed bill. While I'm not opposed to expanding school choice, the rush manner that this was pushed through the legislature and the lack of transparency and engagement with Kentucky's education stakeholders has led to a poorly constructed and half-baked piece of legislation that will result in predictable problems. The legislature needs to slow down and approach this enormously consequential issue more thoughtfully and with greater transparency. Kentuckians deserve quality public policy when it comes to our kids and our schools, and House Bill 563 is not it. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Commissioner Glass. Joining us virtually, we have Jim Flynn, who represents Kentucky's school superintendents. And after him, we will hear from Eddie Campbell, who represents Kentucky's educators.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Flynn, Executive Director of the Kentucky Association of School Superintendents. Thank you, Governor Beshear, for vetoing House Bill 563. Some may ask why we're fighting so hard against this bill. It's because we work every day with students and families from every facet of society, and we believe fundamentally that public education is an inalienable right of those folks we represent. Therefore, the Kentucky Association of School Superintendents opposes the privatization of public funds for education through tax credits for education opportunity accounts. Proponents of privatization want to convince us that this bill will result in healthy competition among schools and districts. But as we've seen in other states that have tried this, a privatized free market education system only creates unhealthy competition that stifles collaboration and sharing among schools, leads to greater segregation, more concentrations of poverty, and ultimately widens the gap between the haves and the have-nots, creating winners and losers among students and schools. When it comes to education, our Commonwealth values equity and collaboration over competition. And a better approach to these issues will stem from more thoughtful time and cooperation, including the involvement of professional educators that leads to sound public policy that truly supports every learner, every family, and every school. Competition among schools should be left on the ball fields. Schools should not have to compete for already scarce resources when it comes to serving students. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Eddie Campbell. I'm a middle and high school music teacher from Knox County, currently serving as president of the Kentucky Education Association that represents 44,000 retired, active, and aspiring educators all across the Commonwealth. I first want to begin by saying thank you, Governor Beshear and Lieutenant Governor Coleman, for your support of public education. The Kentucky Education Association supports the governor in the veto of House Bill 563. This bill is bad education policy, bad fiscal policy, and bad public policy. House Bill 563 is bad education policy because it has no accountability, no certification, no background checks, and no licensing requirements for the education service providers. Our students and our parents should know that the educator working with them is highly trained and certified. This bill is bad fiscal policy because it gives away $25 million to wealthy and corporate donors and tax credits at the expense of all public services, including our public schools. These funds could be better used to support all students of Kentucky by funding textbooks, resources, technology, counselors, mental health specialists, transportation, or early childhood education. Not to mention that this bill includes little to no financial oversight and accountability for these public tax dollars. This lack of oversight opens the door, which could lead to fraud, abuse, and waste. This bill is bad public policy because it pits our public schools against each other to grab for precious resources. Every child in Kentucky deserves the opportunity to attend a fully funded, high-quality public school that is in the heart of their community. Thank you again, Governor Beshear, for vetoing this bill, and we encourage the General Assembly to uphold this decision for all of Kentucky's children. Thank you.
Thank you to Jim Flynn and Eddie Campbell for joining us virtually today. Next, we have messages from Dr. Jenny Bolander, who is representing all school personnel, school teachers and employees from all 120 counties. Rhonda Caldwell, who is here on behalf of the Kentucky school principals, and Brent McKim, who will be speaking on behalf of teachers in Jefferson County.
Bolander with Kentucky 120 United. Kentucky has over 650,000 students currently enrolled in its public schools. We serve every student who walks through our doors, regardless of race, socioeconomic status, gender, ability level, or religion. All of them are our kids. House Bill 563 would strip $125 million from the budget over 5 years and serve roughly 4,000 students and enable them to use vouchers to attend private schools in our largest urban counties. This money is desperately needed by our public schools to pay for things the legislature has not, like funding for full-day kindergarten, fully funded transportation, textbooks, after-school programs, or early childhood education. This will leave local districts needing to raise taxes in order to meet the needs of our students. We remain open and ready to talk about ways that we can really help public education and all of our kids, but House Bill 563 is not the way to do that. Our children deserve better.
I'm Rhonda Caldwell, Executive Director of the Kentucky Association of School Administrators, representing 3,100 public school leaders who lead our K-12 public schools today. KASA remains opposed to House Bill 563. It is the divide between us. It separates us by private interest and divides us in our purpose for the common good of Kentucky's society. In the final hours on day 28 of the 30-day legislative session, this bill was passed by a House divided, a vote of 48 yes to 47 noes. House Bill 563 is filled with hollow promises and private agendas. It pits private schools against public schools and public schools against each other. It pits private values against the common good of society, and it paves the way for segregation and inequity of educational opportunities for all students. It is the first step in completely privatizing public education. Policy is the work of future making. House Bill 563 is indicative of a bright future for only a few. We must work together to implement the best school model to meet the needs of all Kentucky students, not just a few. We must create sound policy that unites us for a better Kentucky, not one that divides us.
Hi, I'm Brett McKim, a high school science teacher in Jefferson County and the elected president of the Jefferson County Teachers Association. On behalf of the 5,800 members of JCTA, we are asking the governor to veto House Bill 563 because it would put students at significant risk. It does so because the bill actually prohibits the state from regulating the education service providers that the bill would create. That means the state would not be able to do something as fundamental as requiring a criminal background check for employees at these education service provider organizations who would be working directly with students. As educators who have dedicated our careers to making a positive difference for students, this is absolutely unacceptable. We cannot allow House Bill 563 to become law and put students in jeopardy in this way.
Thank you to all of you for sending those messages of support in today. And we've saved the best for last. The most important voice that is all too often left out of the conversation belongs to our students. The governor and I showed our commitment to student voice by adding a current student to Kentucky's Board of Education for the first time in our state's history. The decisions made in our capital impact them, and we are committed to lifting up their voices. Arivumani Srivastava, who is a high school junior at the Gatton Academy at WKU in Bowling Green, is here to represent Kentucky's Student Voice Team.
Siphoning away funding from already struggling schools will only further exacerbate existing divides between well-funded and under-resourced schools. As schools lose students and their associated funding, they will inevitably be forced to cut spending. This will lead to underfunded schools being forced to reduce spending on supplies, school activities, and possibly even teachers. The result would be disastrous, with gaps between the wealthiest and poorest schools being significantly widened. This type of shift will also follow pre-existing socioeconomic and racial segregation in our schools, encouraging the congregation of privileged students who can afford access to wealthier schools while leaving their less privileged peers behind and underfunded. This type of segregation is unacceptable. Growing up in diverse schools is transformative in developing our identity as a person while also fostering respect and understanding between people of different backgrounds. House Bill 563 would eliminate this integral part of Kentucky students' education.
Pretty special to see one of our students on one of the biggest stages. And remember, this isn't about me. It's not about the legislature. It's not about any political parties. It's about our kids and the critical role that public education supports. We have to support that institution, both under the Constitution, which all lawmakers have taken an oath towards, but also because it's the right thing to do. Okay, so now some good news. And let's talk about the bills that help support education. Let's start with Senate Bill 128. This past year has been uniquely challenging. And while educators have done their best in these trying circumstances, the pandemic has deprived some students of priceless opportunities and memories. The supplemental school year program will allow those students the chance to enjoy the same high school experience they expected a year ago. School districts who choose this option for their students also will have access to federal funds to remedy learning losses in creative ways and to help all students get back on track academically. Senate Bill 101. Many local school districts and their communities want the flexibility that comes with managing their own career and technical education centers, but they are deterred by the potential funding loss. This legislation ensures a reliable funding stream for those districts that choose to convert their state-operated center into local control. Senate Bill 101 will make career and technical education more responsive to stakeholders with the enhanced ability to work with local industry to produce the kind of workers their communities need and to give you the training to get that job that's waiting for you right across the street. I've already signed this bill, but it's important to note that there is language in the budget bill that would undo the effort of this bill. that would frustrate it and require a different type of funding. So when it comes time, I will line item veto that portion of the executive branch budget bill to make this bill and its intent a reality. House Bill 158. House Bill 158 invests in our students by supporting Kentucky's only four-year aviation professional pilot degree program at Eastern Kentucky University. It increases cooperation between the university and the local air board, giving students more opportunities to learn. Kentucky's training a workforce that will not just be ready for the future, but will be ready to help lead our nation into that future. That's why I'm proud this bill also helps us prepare for the state-of-the-art Flight Training Center planned for construction at the Central Kentucky Regional Airport. House Bill 158 is great news for EKU and the entire Commonwealth. Senate Bill 135. It provides common sense updates to ensure that state funding for higher education is distributed to campuses on a more sustainable basis. It also supports efforts by colleges and universities to enroll and graduate more Kentuckians with either a certificate or a degree by 2030. My administration will always put education first, and I'm proud to support this bill that'll help more of our students pursue their dreams and build a better Kentucky for all of us. We also have someone else who wants to say a few words about how important this bill is to higher education. Council on Post-Secondary Education President Aaron Thompson.
Thank you for your support of the performance funding bill for higher education, which is Senate Bill 135. Now, this bill provides common sense updates. It ensures that funding for higher education is distributed on a more sustainable basis, which will keep campuses from falling off the fiscal cliff. Senate Bill 135 will also advance progress on Kentucky's 60 by 30 goal, which, as you know, is that we need to have 60% of our Kentucky's working age population with a high quality degree or credential by the year 2030. Now, that's important because we know that higher education is the direct driver of great economic outcomes in Kentucky and in the nation. Now, what we know from a comprehensive assessment is that performance funding is helping to close achievement gaps and creating more opportunities for Kentuckians to have a sustainable career. It's driving tremendous growth in baccalaureate degree production at our public universities, especially in the areas of STEM and health fields. We're also seeing more underrepresented minority students get degrees and credentials. And we're seeing a similar trend in associate degrees and credentials at KCTCS. So, Governor, thank you for support of higher education. We also want to thank you for signing Senate Bill 135, and we want to thank the General Assembly for putting it forward.
Thank you to President and Dr. Thompson. Senate Bill 127. This bill mirrors what was done for students with life-threatening allergies 8 years ago and applies to asthma, which can also be a life-threatening condition. Having a rescue inhaler on site for students suffering from an asthma attack is just common sense, and it can mean the difference between life and death. Schools are encouraged but not required to at least keep 2 rescue inhalers on hand, and surely they will all do it. It is a minimal expense that can save somebody's life. And remember, those are your students or your faculty. We ought to want to do that. I support this bill, and I encourage our school leaders to take action. All right. So today, I've taken some crucial action to support, but also to protect public education. And we've heard from some strong voices that want nothing but the best for our children and our schools. We will continue to fight until our public schools are properly funded and supported, and our educators receive the raise and the benefits that they deserve. All right, with that, we will turn it over to questions. Remaining here, so your 2 choices are myself and the Lieutenant Governor. So we'll start with Olivia Krauth from the Courier-Journal.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome. Okay, so if the legislature overrides your veto, specifically of House Bill 563, would you challenge them in court?
I know it will be challenged in court. I haven't thought through who the parties would be, but there is a constitutional provision that requires public dollars to be spent on public schools. And then it's only a matter of time, and this would probably be the instigating moment where someone would challenge our public school funding on the basis of the Rose decision. But it shouldn't come to that, right? I mean, this is an extreme bill passed when there's very little access to the Capitol that would have longstanding ramifications that I believe would be the beginning of the end to public education. The issues about the independent school districts, we can work on those. But to say we ought to move forward with this bill because of that, when it's going to be the beginning of the end for all of our public education school districts, would just be wrong. Jess Clark from WFPL.
Hello, Governor. Can you clarify? So you're saying if you did go to court over House Bill 563, are you saying that there is a larger issue of the constitutionality of the way the General Assembly is funding education in Kentucky, or would you just be challenging 563? Is there a larger case that you are suggesting is being made?
So again, I'm only saying that I do believe there would be a court challenge. That could come from a school district. It could come from any Kentucky citizen. So we're not threatening that action. We're just trying to be really clear that this is unconstitutional, and we believe would receive a challenge first for the use of public dollars for private schools. But second, it would really throw us over the tipping point of what is constitutionally required and the amount of funding we send to our public schools. That's something that we need to think about a lot deeper moving forward. When you look at the lack of adjustment for inflation in the SEEK formula, we are very close in many analyses, especially when you look at disparities of the same thing they were talking about in the Rose case. That's why I wanted to increase the SEEK formula. That's why I wanted to provide money for textbooks and technology. And why starve public education when we have $600 million of extra funds right now, and where we could make all of those increases, which are recurring expenses, just within the revenues we're receiving. Just about every month, we're breaking every record on collection of tax revenue that we've had. So now's the time to invest, and where better to invest than public education. Shelby Lofton from WKYT.
Hi, Governor. I also have a question regarding House Bill 563. What would you say to the parents, especially of low and middle income children, that feel that their child is trapped in an underperforming school and your veto would take away their choice?
Well, I would tell them that this bill is not the answer, that their children would then be subject to an unregulated private entity that could take part of the money that is out there and pay themselves. That we have seen what these do in other states, and we believe it's to provide a subpar education that can be harmful in many ways to those children. My answer to them is we got a duty to do better in our public schools. And the answer isn't to create an unregulated body that can take part of their money and then ultimately push public dollars to private schools. But the other thing that I'd tell them is it's just not legal, right? It's in our Constitution. And if that's something that the legislature wants to change, they've got to do it by amendment. Joe Ragusa from Spectrum.
Hi, Governor. I have a couple questions. I'll ask the first one because it's not necessarily related to the education bills, but my second one is, do you anticipate having more public bill signings or vetoes Thursday and Friday? I know the budget bills are still kind of up there, and I imagine there's probably a few dozen that are still out there. The second one is about House Bill 258. I know that the main drivers of this proposal say that the pension system needs to be reformed and it's unsustainable. How do you kind of respond to that argument that this bill is needed to address that concern? And do you anticipate any court challenges with that bill?
So as of now, we don't have a press conference set for Thursday or Friday. I think the remaining vetoes are going to be line item and maybe a few other bills, and those will be published. If we believe there's a need, we'll make sure we get out the the notice well ahead. As far as pensions, we can afford them. We just have to be committed to them. And certainly the teacher's pension is something that we must be committed to. We're telling new teachers right now, hey, you don't get Social Security, which provides certain guarantees for your retirement. And we are not going to give you the same pension that was meant to provide you those guarantees. And we're not going to pay you more. So please come, because it's an amazing public service, to make less throughout the course of your entire life and maybe struggle to send your own kids through higher education. We can't do that. And I think that we see in the passage of this bill what it's meant to do, which is to start starving public education. If it wasn't, I believe you would see an increase in salary. You would see an increase in other benefits. And listen, our teachers, they work for decades upon decades upon decades. We just owe them a reasonable retirement. And I think we ought to live up to that promise. And it ought to be for everybody. For everybody. Our kids right now can choose to do anything. And most of their choices would pay them more than being a teacher. And so I think the least we can do is have the type of benefits that makes that overall compensation package something people can live with or live on. Tom Latek from Kentucky Today.
Good afternoon, Governor. I have a question on a slightly different topic. This week, the Kentucky Commission on Human Rights has had 3 members resign, and there was a 4th one who, well, there was already 1 vacancy, so that means there's 4 openings on the 11-member commission. Do you have any thoughts on these resignations and any thoughts on how you may fill them?
I only know that I was told there was a disagreement on something that went to a vote. And obviously the vote is how we decide disagreements. If folks felt like they couldn't stay for whichever reason, and I haven't received the details, then we'll respect their decision to step down and thank them for their service. What I will plan to do is ensure that we have champions for human rights, that we have folks that will take their duties seriously and ensure that when folks have complaints, that they are handled in a professional way, and that we move civil rights, human rights forward in Kentucky, because everyone deserves equal protection under the law. No one should be discriminated for any reason, the color of their skin, their gender, who they love. We are past that in our society. And you know what? Our companies and our economy and so much more expects so much better. So we'll make sure that we appoint folks that are ready, willing, and able to do the job. Lawrence Smith from WDRB.
Governor, this bill originally passed 48 to 47, 563. What does that tell you about the possibility or likelihood that your veto will actually be upheld?
Well, a lot of this could be covered in the drama of the governor and the legislature, or Democrats and Republicans. I just don't see public education that way. You know, I went to Kentucky's public schools, and people that sat next to me are now Democrats or Republicans, independents. Most of them, I don't know what party they're in, but public education prepared all of us for our futures. And we should all want the same for our kids. Can we expect more from public education? Absolutely. But the way to do that is not to defund it. So I think that right now our representatives and senators are in their districts. And hopefully they are hearing from folks out there about their thoughts. And at the end, we don't come to Frankfort to be an us versus a them. We come to represent the people of Kentucky. I believe the people of Kentucky overwhelmingly support public education. All right, our last question, Mark Vanderhoff, WLKY.
Governor, we're starting to get a lot of calls from people who've discovered that they're victims of unemployment insurance fraud. And there was a story about it, the national problem on NPR this morning. Can you just give us an update on the latest in the state's response to this growing problem?
Yeah, the state continues to fight this problem like every state across the country. This is some of the most significant, widest fraud that I've seen since becoming a public official, and it's done by cyber criminals. You know, lots of people think that if they're the victim of this fraud, it's one individual sitting in one place that's trying to take advantage of them. A lot of this is people buying all your information off the dark web. They're not getting it from our system, and having tens of thousands of applications where they already have, because of the dark web or another way they got it, you know, your name, your social security number, and the rest. Thankfully, we have some systems in place, and we are getting more systems in place. We are looking at additional partners because of the level and the scale of this fraud, and our commitment is to stop it. Remember that these days it's a bigger and bigger challenge to protect your private information. But even though people have gotten your private information from somewhere else, it's our job to put the tools in place to stop people from taking advantage of you. Now, there are some individuals out there that think that they have been subjected to fraud, that there hasn't been a harm yet. A lot of what we are seeing are a huge amount of applications, and that auto-generates a letter, and we're going to work on that, but it auto-generates a letter just saying, if you're approved, you'll get X amount. That doesn't mean you're approved. In fact, you're not, and it doesn't mean a check will be sent out to that location. But we're working on making sure that we can stop that earlier. Another problem is it is absolutely clogging the drain, meaning it's becoming harder and harder to get to the real claims and the people that need help as the tens of thousands of fraudulent claims stack up. How do you find that real one? And so we're putting in the process right now to stop fraud, not just because it's bad, not just because we want to make sure we're not losing money, but because it's preventing us from helping good people that need help. All right, everybody, that's it for today. Let's try to do the right thing. Let's support our schools. Let's support our kids. Let's make sure that this bill does not become law. And I also want to thank legislators for all the other good pieces of legislation we talked about today. Thank you.